Okay, this is Jody Sidlauskis, RIT Associate Archivist. Today is October 17th, 2015, and I am here at the RIT Brick City Homecoming Weekend. It is Saturday, and we are conducting interviews with the class of 1965. These folks have returned to campus this weekend to remember and celebrate their time at RIT. And we're going to conduct a little interview with Mr. Gerald Hills, right?
Yep, Jerry, or Gerald with a G.
Okay.
Hills, like mountains, only smaller.
All right, we got that. Okay, so our first interview today. So, Jerry, first of all, how many years were you at RIT?
4 years, 1961 to 65, which of course is 50 years ago, the 65 part. So
Yes.
they were good years. In fact, I guess this is kind of an overarching comment. The more I've reflected on RIT and the role of RIT in my own development, I really want to thank RIT for having really a very positive impact on my life. So, but yes, those were good years.
And what did you major in?
In business, Bachelor of Science degree in the business school.
Okay. And do you remember why you chose RIT?
You know, I've thought about that. You know, I think a key piece of that was my guidance counselor at Sherburne High School in upstate New York, kind of in the middle of nowhere between Binghamton and Syracuse.
Okay.
And there was a representative from RIT that came to his office, and in advance of that, he had asked me if I'd like to sit in on a meeting with the RIT representative, and and that ended up playing a major role. And in fact, I was the first kid of my family to go to college.
Oh.
And I had no idea what it was. My parents had no idea either, regarding getting into higher ed. And in fact, probably the number 2 alternative I had was really a community college to get into real estate. I was already kind of a little interested in real estate. I continue to have that interest today, but I've never done much of anything with it. But yeah, my decision to come to RIT was probably less than perfect, but it worked out great.
Did you visit the campus or anything beforehand?
I did not,
Yeah.
no. And of course, we're talking here about the old campus, the downtown campus.
Correct.
No, in fact, I remember when Mom and Dad dropped me at Nathaniel Rochester Hall. That was my first exposure to Rochester, New York.
Oh.
Really.
Yeah.
And I remember standing on the street corner with my suitcase, and they were driving away, and I think, whoa, what have I gotten into?
Exactly. Here you are on the curb. Bye-bye.
See you around.
That was your orientation back then.
Yeah, but I had terrific parents. I guess if I had anything good going, I had good values. The small town kind of values.
Yeah.
And the usual religious kind of background for small town people in upstate New York.
Sure.
And I have no. Looking back, I feel blessed to have grown up in the family I grew up in, even though we had no material wealth at all. and in fact, quite the opposite. I mean, we didn't starve, but you know, money was tight,
And that's a good point. Like, how was your college going to be paid for when there was little money?
you know, I've tried to reconstruct that in my mind the last few days, and tuition and fees were far less. I mean, even adjusting, I think, for inflation, you know, tuition and fees were, by today's standards, an amazing bargain.
Yes.
And Mom and Dad didn't have a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think RIT did give me a quote scholarship, unquote. When I graduated from high school, I was given what was called the Sisson Scholarship, which was given to kids that seemed to have good values and had not gotten into a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I better not comment further on that one.
Nope. we can
But,
just think about that one.
Yeah, but yeah, good old Sherburne High School and my upbringing, and you know, the next door neighbors, the guy, Mark Phillips, the guy, the man there of the house. He also headed up the church choir, and one of probably my two best buddies were in that you know, setting.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was a different era than we
It
have
was a
today.
good solid upbringing.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you were in this big city
Yes.
of Rochester, and
Right.
you lived in the Rochester Nathaniel Hall, which was a men's dormitory at the time. Let's see, how can you tell us some of the classes that you took?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was business, of course, but there were a number of other courses. In fact, astronomy, for example, was I found that to be a particularly interesting course, and but most of my classes were business. I believe it was the 50 West Main building,
Ah, yes.
where pretty much all my classes were there.
Okay.
And I think I almost crossed the street, maybe a little bit kitty corner, to go from the dorm, Nathaniel Hall, to 50 West Main. So I don't know if I appreciated it at the time, but given Rochester winters, that was probably a great place to be.
I think so.
But you know, I really don't recall. In fact, maybe you could help me. I really don't recall how many students there were at that time. I mean, what comes to mind is 2,000 or 3,000, but
Yeah.
but that's just really a wild guess.
Right. And what we find, and unfortunately I don't have the statistics in front of me, but there was so many more evening school students during those times, especially from the 50s, well, post-war into the 50s and 60s. People were they had to work during the day, so the majority of the classes were held at night. And so the records show that for many, many years, the population during the evening was much bigger than the day school. So you see numbers like 600, 900 maybe. I would be surprised if during the day there was more than 1,000 students there.
Is that right?
Maybe,
Yeah.
And I'll have to look that up, definitely.
Yeah.
Is there anything that stands out as far as your class as a whole? Were you very involved, or was there strong leadership or involvement? Anything you remember specifically about your class or people that you maybe associated with, your friends?
One thing, I think there were a lot of students, and I'm talking full-time day students,
Mm-hmm.
because I really didn't have any feel. I mean, the idea that there was a large night class group, I don't think I was even aware of that. Didn't think about it.
Right.
Um, but the full-time day students, there were really quite a number of students, I think, that were from the local area and nearby region.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, some of my best friends were natives of Rochester, New York, and they'd grown up here and knew the area real well.
Yes, it was more of a local school then.
Yeah. In terms of where I lived, and I follow this a little bit. Yeah.
Sure.
I think I was in the dorm, the Nathaniel Hall, there for, I believe, for 2 years, and kind of going back to paying for things. I presume I probably got a free room or something close to it, because both of those years I think I was a floor advisor or something like that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was sort of the student the student that was supposed to keep calm and quiet and so on.
Keep things orderly.
On my floor.
Uh-huh.
And I don't have any recollection about the financial side of that, but I think I probably got either a free room or a heavily discounted room.
Sure.
Which probably helped a lot.
Sure.
And also my on the financial side, I had income from my co-op job, which ran for 2 years, and and I'm sure by today's standards that was a piddly amount of money, but it was enough, I think, to enable me to handle things financially.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last year, I don't know, it might have been my junior year. I joined Beta Gamma Sigma, and
Which was a business fraternity?
Yeah. In fact, that was really a professional fraternity, but we built in all kinds of social programs. I mean, we ended up being partly social as a fraternity, and but in terms of classifications, we were considered professional, and I guess let me take a look at this real quick. I mean, if it makes sense, I might talk for just a minute about the co-op program.
Yes, I was going to ask you where your co-op was, so please go ahead.
Yeah, that was at Fodler Company, PF.
Oh yes,
Fodler Company. Are they still around, or probably?
They were bought out, and I can't tell you what the name of the company was, but they're still around, but not as Fodler. Yeah, that was a while ago.
I mean, that was a company. I think that their fame at that time was getting glass to adhere to metal, so there were glass-lined tanks, industrial tanks.
Okay.
That they produced. So a very industrial kind of company, at least at that time. And I've often said that was the most valuable single part of my education, my undergrad college education. It was a phenomenal experience, going every other quarter for 2 years to Fodler.
Oh, is that how it worked?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember Norv Ruff. He was a high-level financial guy in the company. Really, I mean, looking back, I would call him a mentor, and he really influenced me a lot, and professionally. And kind of get my bearings and
Mm-hmm. So
decide
you,
what to do.
and you worked under him in the like the finance department, or?
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I was in the kind of the business headquarters of the company. Um, the controller it was Bob Worth. I hadn't thought of Bob Worth for 50 years until yesterday, but he was controller of the company, and I was actually able to work with him a little bit, even though he was a real high level guy. Like what just came to mind was a mistake that I made working for him. I dated a financial statement. Might have been like November 31st, when there was no 31st.
Oh.
And he carried my report into an executive meeting, and they all made fun of him because he had added I had really added a day to the month.
Right.
So I didn't have only great moments, but of course I learned from that.
Sure.
I mean, here I am talking about it 50 years
I
later.
know, that's wonderful.
But Fogler was a great experience. There again, I was rotating every other quarter. They had a program structured for the co-op people, so that one quarter I was in receivables, another in payables, another in payroll.
Mm-hmm.
It was structured around different parts of the accounting finance function, and it was excellent. In fact, I think everybody, the faculty and others, knew that Fogler put together one of the better programs for the co-op
Yeah.
students.
Mm-hmm.
Would be called, maybe would be called interns today. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
That was great. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wondering if you remember who was running Fogler. That was it, the CEO. Do you remember who that would have been?
I don't remember that.
I'll have to look that up in
On
Google history.
the other hand, one of my close friends, in fact, he was in my wedding party, Tony or Anthony Basile. I just learned in conjunction with preparing for this trip that he passed away about a year ago.
Oh.
And I hadn't been in contact for a long time, so I was kind of saddened to find that out. But he was a co-op student, and he went on to become president of Fogler.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then he had 2 or 3 executive positions in other top companies. I mean, big name companies. So he turned out to be a big success story. And in fact, the controller at one point after I left, I ran into him and he said, "We were disappointed when you didn't apply to stay at Fogler." And I said, "Well, I did. I don't know what happened to the application." Looking back, if they hadn't lost my application, but probably it was me. I probably dropped it in the wastebasket by mistake.
Wrong slot.
Now, if it hadn't been for that little quirk, maybe I would have gone to Fogler, and I probably wouldn't have been president, but I would have reported to Tony Vasile probably. But,
Could have been a nice thing, huh? Well, and that didn't work out. Where did your career go?
Well, my career turned out to really be a blessing. I went from being a co-op student, but with the advice and counsel of Edwina Hogadone, the dean.
Yes.
I
Edwina.
don't know, her title might have been director, but she was essentially dean of the business school. What it kind of came down to.
Yep, she was the first
And
female dean.
she seemed to take an interest in me. I mean, looking back, I can see that she, must have liked me because I was on some kind of advisory board. I was like the student representative.
Okay.
And in fact, I still have a framed 5x7 black and white photograph of me standing with Dean Hogadone.
Really?
And she put her robe on, the academic regalia for the photograph.
Oh.
And I've been sorting things the last few months, and
You came across that one?
came across that photograph. That was certainly a good memory. And the associate dean at that time, Gerald Young, had Indiana connections, and between the two of them, they got me interested in going to grad school.
Okay.
And then I went on to RIT provided an excellent base to build on. Looking back again, and it was really a great step in my life to be able to get into Indiana University, and I did my MBA and doctorate in business at Indiana.
Wonderful.
And then I kind of got hooked on higher education. As a high school kid, I was an entrepreneur. I was running every little enterprise you could imagine, driving the neighbors crazy.
Trying to sell them things.
Asking for $1 here and $1 there. And but that was a great, extremely important event, of course, to go on to Indiana. But reflecting on the role of RIT, I probably had more self-confidence than I deserved. I mean, in some ways, I had no confidence, particularly with girls. But looking back, if I'd gone to Harvard, I would have been low man on the totem pole. I came to RIT with very good students, but not Harvard students, I suppose.
Right.
And I ended up being treated pretty special by the dean and other people, and they helped kind of chart my life.
Yes.
And none of that would have happened without my RIT upbringing, if you will.
Sure.
And I really do
The size
appreciate that.
the size of the community, the RIT community at the time, lent itself to that sort of security where your professors knew you, and the president sometimes knew the students.
Yeah.
Because it was.
I never knew the president. I mean, I knew who he was. I recognized him on the street.
Yeah.
And he always looked very distinguished and very impressive, the way he would carry himself and so on. But I was close to the head of the business school, and that did influence my directions considerably. Probably the other, if it would make sense, I'd talk for a minute about kind of the extracurricular area.
Of course.
And specifically the professional fraternity that we alluded to before, Delta Sigma Pi. Yesterday here, I met with 10 or 12 Delta Sigma Pi students, which was really a great delight.
Oh.
Really impressive young people.
Wonderful.
Really great. And they're totally, they're really committed to Delta Sigma Pi here at RIT today. In my year, it must have been 1984 when I was, got that wrong, 1964. When I was elected president of Delta Sigma Pi, we had probably I don't know what we had. We probably had 30 members or maybe more. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that we had every person in the fraternity graduating, and so Delta Sigma was going to be extinct if we didn't bring in new members.
I see.
So looking back, you know, probably good leadership training and intuitive strategizing, and I'm sure a lot of other students probably did more than I did, but to be president of a fraternity that's destined for extinction, and then at the end of the year, we had 45 new members.
Oh,
And so that was a great feeling, you know, to feel like we kind of saved Delta Sig,
sure. And
and
it was going to go on after you.
it you know, it worked out really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of experiences in Delta Sig that were formative, were really important to me. And I don't remember being involved in getting a house for Delta Sig, but particularly being a professional fraternity, it was kind of striking that there was a fraternity house, and I became the manager of the house,
Oh,
which was another formative kind of thing.
yep.
And looking back, in fact, probably my greatest claim to fame, even though I was pretty much a teetotaler when I arrived at RIT, by my junior year, my claim to fame was having a totally separate refrigerator full of beer. So that I think that established my reputation. Probably led to me becoming president of the fraternity.
Yes, right.
And compare that to today's politics, is probably about as juicy as Donald Trump is today. You know. Sorry, to bring that up.
It was good to put that reference in.
Yeah. But yeah, other experiences at the house. I mean, it was on Troop Street,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure if I think that street or part of the street might still exist. I'm not sure.
Yes, it is there. Yes,
So that the house that we were in might still be standing,
it very well could be.
and it was you know, the neighborhood was kind of on the edge of a kind of economically disadvantaged area, and then there were the riots, kind of on the bad news side, but you know, that was a reflection of the times, the racial conflict and the like,
Right.
and there were riots, which must have been around 1964.
Yes, and what Jerry's referring to is in Rochester in the summer. It was July 1964. There was riots that had broken out in downtown Rochester, and because of the racial tensions and economic conditions, and it was a difficult time in Rochester, as well as many other cities in the United States. And then that would have happened. You would have not been there in the summer, or were you there in the summers?
I was here because of my co-op
Okay.
rotation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, growing up in rural upstate New York, my father was a great sports, outdoorsman,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a gun. Everybody did.
Yes.
Still does, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up having a loaded 20 gauge under my bed.
Oh.
at the fraternity house because I was only maybe 3 blocks away from some of the worst conflict where people did die. In fact, there was also a helicopter crash. It had, I think, probably police and so on were in the helicopter, and they were flying over the riot area, and I forget what caused the crash, but it did crash, and I think there was at least one person that was killed from that. So those were interesting times, and in fact, recent history here in the U.S. It reminds me a little bit of back then, because there's seems like there's more racial conflict today than a year or 2 or 3 ago.
It does seem that way.
But in fact, I guess a little bit related was the parking lot was about a block from our fraternity house, and one day it was completely daylight and everything, and I went to the parking lot, was opening my car door, and not paying a whole lot of attention to anything, and all of a sudden I get like a 4-inch limb that crossed the side of my head, and I was accosted by it's probably not a coincidence, by a renegade African American, and there again I think it probably related to the whole racial context.
Sure.
But I ended up, I was quite stunned at that moment, of course, and I fell down, got up. We were right near a ledge, like 3-4 feet drop off, and I gave him I kind of heaved him over the edge, and he fell. But he was a big, strong-looking guy. I can still remember him.
Wow.
And it was, and then other people started to get him, started to come, and so he took off. We called the police. The police put me in the car, and we went down the street, and he was just walking down the street, and so they arrested him. And he, long story short, is he never did get convicted of anything, which was another probably context issue with kind of letting everybody have kind of the extra mile. But I was driving through Rochester a couple years after that. I'd graduated, and I heard on the radio that this gentleman whose last name was Strong, that he had been killed in a gunfight.
Oh.
So I guess you could, it's a little on the sick side, but I guess there was a justice, but it reflected a kind of a sad era in U.S. history.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I think, like someone mentioned yesterday, that was probably a big factor in RIT's decision to move out of the city.
Good point. Yeah.
Making that decision to go to Henrietta at that time.
I was saying to my brother, who's with me today, that was a huge decision. And the president and the board of trustees, they must have realized they were making a momentous decision.
Yes.
It would either work or it wouldn't work.
Yes.
And it worked. So.
Thank goodness. We're almost out of time, Jerry. Is there anything else you'd like to mention? Let's see, I think we covered. I guess one thing I wanted to ask you quickly was, did you stay in touch with friends from RIT over the years, or did it kind of just, everybody went on with their lives?
Yeah, I had 2 people in my wedding party from RIT, and but I've just not done a very good job of keeping up, and I've had a little bit of contact. I mean, really very little contact. But in thinking about this trip, I really got to wondering, what people are doing. As I mentioned, Tony Basile passed away.
Yes.
John Amodio, I left him. I've got his phone number now,
Okay.
and I tried to reach him yesterday. And Patrick Russell is in Santa Fe, and we had at least an hour really great discussion a week ago.
Oh, wonderful.
So I'm beginning to, I'm kind of rebuilding my closest friendship circle.
Yes. Yes.
But
And I didn't ask you, where do you live now?
Chicago.
Chicago. Okay.
Yeah. When I finished at Indiana, I went to the University of Tennessee for 13 years. Was an assistant dean in central administration in the graduate school when I left. But by then I'd kind of caught the bug to work in what today is the entrepreneurship field, starting businesses and innovation and all that.
Nice.
And there are quite a few misguided people that kind of view me as one of the kind of original dozen professors that worked very, very hard for decades to try to legitimize attention to new companies and smaller companies, and also like family businesses and so on. Because business schools historically focused almost totally on the largest companies,
Corporations.
and I always viewed that as an injustice, really.
Yes.
And so I've had this passionate desire, so I ended up being the first president and co-founder of what's called the U.S. Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and
Nice.
and I've been honored by them 2 or 3 different times as really a co-founder of the organization,
And how important that is today.
yeah, I mean that group has hundreds of professors now as members, and it is a kick to go to the meetings and have people walk up to me and say, "Yeah, you're Jerry Hills. You were here at the beginning. The program has you listed as the first president. Is that?" Yeah, but
Hey, that's your mark.
I mean, what life is about, I think, is making a difference. This life is, I think, kind of making a difference, and family and friends, kind of the other foci. But I've always tried to make a difference, and I've definitely changed. I love to be the founder of things, and kind of bringing Delta Sig back from no members to starting academic associations.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, and I think it's fabulous that you were able to meet with those students today and see how they're still making a difference on the campus here.
No, that was really, really special. In fact, I said to my brother last night that's the single nicest moment that I've had in this trip is to get together with the students.
That's great.
And they all, they dressed up, if you will.
Aww.
They were not in their everyday garb.
Yeah.
And, that was very nice of them to do that. And I was impressed by their commitment to RIT in general.
Yeah.
And also meeting with the head of your innovation entrepreneurship unit. It's really, I've known him at a distance over the years, followed his publications, and I'd seen him at meetings a little bit and so on. But he's an impressive fellow.
And I should know who that is.
Yeah, in fact, you finally got me here at the very end of the interview.
Right.
My memory just
Well,
left me.
it's my job to look that one up.
Well, what I'm thinking is Richard DiMartino. Does that sound right? You're not sure. Yeah.
I am not sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
I-
it's definitely Richard. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's DiMartino. In fact, well, yeah.
Okay. We're going to wrap up this interview, and I want to thank you for being here today and sharing all these wonderful memories and thoughts. And I'm so glad you were able to come and make this journey. And I hope it leaves a nice memory for you for years to come. And for RIT and the RIT archives, we're going to preserve this interview, and we plan to use it in the future for generations to come. And I thank you again for being here.
Well, if there's a context here that makes it a value, that would be really great. But beyond that, I've had a lot of fun thinking.
Yes, and it's amazing
Memories.
what's still in there that came